Hey trainers, welcome back to another episode of Soundproof Podcast Production Future Sight. As always, my name is Brendan, and as always, I am joined by Jake. We're excited to bring you 2 of 2 as far as Series 1 regionals go. Unfortunately, we got a pretty cool meta, and we get 2 major tournaments out of it.
Yeah, it would have been fun to see more. I think it was a really cool meta, and I think it still had a lot of room to grow. I think we even talked about it last time, but we saw big shifts even just before San Diego, which was the first North American one. So I think a lot more
going into Liverpool.
Yeah.
Like I think both of these events have had pretty big shifts in metagame, which is really exciting and usually like indicative of what could end up being a strong and exciting formats. But of course, we are still on the rotating format, and everything after this, I believe, is going to be in Series 2.
Yeah.
Which does include the Ocean Internationals. Yeah, for now we're finishing up Series 1 here with the second event, and we picked a match from the Liverpool Regional Championships, which happened this past weekend, and the match that we've selected is one of the top 4 matches. So I know we featured Dondozo 2 weeks ago when we went over San Diego, so we wanted to kind of like shy away from that a little bit, which in some ways is doing the tournament field a disservice because there was a lot of Dondozo in there, but also it might be doing both us and you a service as far as viewing this content.
Yeah, it's like we all kind of know how Dondozo plays, right? Like we want to see something else from time to time. So the winner of Liverpool did use Dondozo, and there were some really funny sleep talk Tatsugiri moments too, so even in the final, which was kind of funny. But instead, we decided to bring you a top 4 match featuring the other finalist, Alex, who is running a like NDD Armor Rouge Trick Room team, and he's playing Francesco Pardini. Francesco, that's probably how you say it, right? I should probably know that.
I assume.
That's what I'm going to say. Who has a more unique team. A lot of it's built around residual damage, which you pointed out earlier, Brendan.
Right. Yeah, I think this is like a really exciting matchup, like 2 very prominent European players. Francesco is obviously like a 2-time national champion, and I think he's also got a world's top cut. And then Alex is a little bit of not quite as well known, given that Francesco is like one of the best European players of all time, but like definitely very strong in his own right. I think he top cut worlds last year.
He did, yeah.
So yeah, two very strong players, which is what you would hope to see here in the final or in the top 4 of a regional championship. So yeah, we'll talk about their teams a little bit. Jake kind of gave a quick summary, but the team that Alex is running is. Well, let me put it this way. So one of the things that I had told to Jake when we were team building going into San Diego is that I feel like people are sleeping on Psychic Spam, and I'd be really afraid of playing somebody that had a brain that was using it. So it's kind of like easy to just sort of like flowchart against this stuff when you see it in a best of 1 ladder, because there are a lot of things that beat it. Although it does kind of do some scary things in closed team sheet with weak armor and whatever. But the general consensus was that it probably wasn't very good in open team sheets, and I never really agreed with that. And this is, the most successful take on it that we've seen, and it is hard Trick Room with a lot of, some of the Pokemon that we're used to seeing in hard Trick Room, be it insert Final Gambitmon here. Hatterene is a really popular hard Trick Room mon. So is Indeedee. And of course, Torkoal is like hard Trick Room enemy number 1, and then Armor Rouge is kind of the glue piece between the fire and the psychic stuff that's going on. And then of course, King Gambit is a better and slower version of Bisharp, so why the heck not? It's a really good Pokemon, of course. So yeah, I think this is like a not unexpected take on the team, but cool and interesting nonetheless.
Yeah, it has a lot of pieces of like typical hard Trick Room teams that you'd see. Like one specifically that jumps out to me is Alexander Hill's 2017 team that he won Fort Wayne with, and he had Choice Scarf, Final Gambit, Lucario, and then maybe one more redirection, or maybe not, but then he had multiple Trick Room setters. He had Torkoal, I believe, and then other just strong attackers that can take really good advantage of it. I think Torkoal is just a fixture of hard Trick Room or even semi Trick Room at this point, just because it has so much damage it can put out.
Yeah, and the utility of Sun, especially in a meta that's kind of being dominated by water types right now, is also underrated, I think. So
Yeah.
I'm sure that was relevant in the run, if he was playing against Palpin Pelipper stuff and what have you. And then the team that's on the right side of your screen right now is a little bit different than really anything that we've seen
Yeah.
at this point in unfortunately what is a fledgling and now over format. Some of the Pokemon look a little familiar, where Garganacl recently won San Diego, and this is similar to that Garganacl, with the exception of the Terra type.
Mm-hmm.
We've seen a little bit of Tauros, especially recently, where it's started to kind of like pop up a little bit more on good stuffy type teams. Glamora has kind of been around, and then we've seen a lot of like that Choice Band or Assault Vest Dragonite stuff that's sort of centered around maximizing your E-speed damage. But everything else, Gastrodon has been kind of absent. Glamora's very limited usage. Dragapult's very limited usage, and then after we get past that, like the sets on the dragon types is like we're very far from what the metagame looked like at this point.
Yeah, it's like Dragapult. I would say like pop up here and there, but I don't think it had a whole lot of traction going into these events. Dragonite certainly did, but not this set. You'll see that the Dragapult is Choice Band Terra Dragon with Outrage, which I don't think is a move that has ever been very popular in VGC, just to
I
do
don't think
its
I've ever seen
unreliability.
it.
And then Dragonite is Rocky Helmet multi-scale with Fire Spin and Roost. And so that kind of compounds the like residual damage with the Garganacl Salt Cure, with the Toxic Spikes from Glamora, and it just gives you a pretty good, Pokemon that's gonna cause. It's gonna be really annoying. Like Helmet is an annoying item. Roost multi-scale Dragonite is very annoying. Fire Spin keeps you trapped. It's there to make your day a little bit more unenjoyable.
Yeah, there are definitely a lot of things that don't seem enjoyable to play against, but unfortunately we don't have to. We just get to watch. So we'll jump here into game one. We see the leads up on screen on Alex's side of the field. That's going to look a little bit familiar, but two less familiar Pokemon on Francesco's side of the field. So you kind of know what Indeedee Armor Rouge wants to do, but seeing as Dragapult, we know that it's Choice Band. It's going to go for Terra Dragon. It's just going to try and get damage down on this combination, and one of the things about is you basically just need to lead something that can knock out Indeedee so that you can get some damage down onto Armor Rouge.
Yeah, and the Choice Band Terra Dragon Outrage will certainly be able to do that.
It certainly will.
I think like that's a pretty safe outrage there, because either way you're gonna knock something out, and there's not like the Hatterene can switch in, but it doesn't want to take anything from the Glamora, and King Gambit probably still takes a bunch from the outrage. But either way, you guarantee the knockout either on Indeedee if it follow me's, or on Armor Rouge if you happen to hit that slot. And there's no protect. In open team sheets, there's no protect on the field, so you're not going to whiff into protect. Unfortunately, he barely misses that KO with Power Gem, which would have probably just been game ending, like immediately.
For sure.
Should that have knocked out?
Yeah, if Trick Room doesn't go up, I mean, Dragapult just gets to outrage a whole bunch of times, and like where you get your damage onto Hatterene can come from any number of places.
Yeah.
But instead, Trick Room is up, and this looks a lot different as Hatterene gets to come onto the field for free against a Dragon type and a Poison type, both of which it hits for super effective damage, and that Dragapult into like a Life Orb Dazzling Gleam is not very long for this world. And it's kind of interesting in that Jake said that, like, okay, if that Power Gem had done enough, the game's probably over. Well, instead, it didn't, and the game is over, just kind of in the other direction.
Yeah, I mean, this does look like a tough spot for Francesco. Thankfully, I think the Garganacl here is a lot more annoying than I probably would have given it credit for on Team Preview, just because now it probably is slower / faster than the Hatterene. It'll move second in Trick Room, but it's certainly not the Armor Rouge. And thanks to that Power Gem, Assault Cure easily knocks out Armor Rouge. There's no Protect there. So Alex still has to play with intent here. Like, he can't just kind of click mindless buttons, especially because Wide Guard is on that Garganacl. And so if you want to just click Dazzling Gleam, Expanding Force, like you did the last turn, it's not really something you can do just yet.
Yeah, and no Wide Guard here, so you can kind of see, as Jake mentioned, that those games are already in effect, and Alex went for the kind of like hedge his bets option there, where he was like, okay, I'm going to use one spread and one non-spread so that I can at the very least get damage down, whereas, it would have been nice to be able to Expanding Force there and get an awful lot of damage onto Garganacl, but that's not really, the safest option available.
Yeah. And you'll even see here, like, again, a Dazzling Gleam is the best thing. You have to hit the Dragonite, but the Wide Guard threatened there means that you kind of have to think twice before you just click it. And you can even see Alex here trying to decide what he's doing, going back and forth. But like even now, the Garganacl is not going to get knocked out by the Hatterene most likely because they are very bulky. And it will be able to threaten the Armourouge with a KO here. And we even just see the Psychic wanted to make sure he breaks that multi-scale without fearing Wide Guard there.
Yeah, and still no wide guard, so the games are in full effect, and that Psychic still does like a lot of damage.
Yeah.
Even through multi-scale there, and a fire like you. I had no idea what that animation looked like.
Did anyone?
Other than Francesco, that move exists pretty regularly. But yeah, now Torkoal gets to come onto the field, and I believe there's one turn of Trick Room left, so almost out of the woods. But again, with open team sheets where we know that this Dragonite like doesn't have Protect, its multi-scale is broken, you can fire like pretty freely into that slot. And then as long as you find enough damage to knock out Garganacl over the rest of the game, which like these two special attackers you would think probably have enough to do so, then
I don't know.
I think you need to find one turn to get a double target onto it, right? Is the thing.
Pretty much, yeah. You have to make sure that I don't know, because the Garganacl is still going to be bulky enough that it doesn't need to like protect immediately. Like it can get Assault Cure off here if it really wants to. Because if it doesn't, the Dragonite probably gets a move off. It's a kind of a trade-off here, because if you think a Dazzling Gleam is coming, you Wide Guard, and it is there, but you probably know that if the Hatterene Dazzling Gleams, the Garganacl is not getting knocked out, and if the Hatterene doesn't Dazzling Gleam, it's because the Hatterene targeted the Garganacl and not the Dragonite. So there's a lot of like residual damage here that can come out, because we're going to see the Hatterene get knocked out by the Salt Cure or Fire Spin here. Now that Torkoal has been Salt Cured, another bonus of not using Wide Guard this turn is that you can now like Protect. If you had Wide Guarded there, you would have had to risk a Protect or just go straight for Recover. But at this point, I don't actually think the Garganacl gets knocked out, just because the Torkoal is not going to have enough damage.
Because it's charcoal.
It's charcoal and not like Specs or some other like Omni boosting item. Yeah.
Yeah, so despite some of the best positioning and not hitting a single time into Wide Guard, Garganacl is potentially going to be able to pull this one out. I don't actually know the damage calc. After a Recover, I would guess that it's offensive Torkoal, but not an offensive item, in that it can only use fire type moves.
Yeah. Torkoal not using fire moves is not very strong.
Not a lot of damage.
Yeah.
Oh, that's not even close.
No.
Not even close. Okay, so then we go to Salt Cure here.
Yeah, the Torkoal eventually gets worn down by Salt Cure here, but I think you mentioned like Alex never whiffing into Wide Guard, but the threat of Wide Guard was enough a lot of the time. Like there were multiple turns where Alex didn't use Expanding Force or Dazzling Gleam, in which he could have, probably wanting to make sure that any damage got on the field, as opposed to going for the big damage and getting blocked. It's a rough trade-off, just because if you do that enough times and you give up some damage a few times, it starts adding up, right? You have to trade some damage to make sure there's anything that happens, but then you don't get enough down in the 3 or 4 turns you have Trick Room up.
Right, and it lived the eruption on red health as well.
It was
so
pretty low,
one Expanding Force is enough to tip the tables there. Yeah. Damn, Garganacl is so bulky. When we tried to use it, I was not impressed.
No, we were still trying to do the like WinCon Garganacl with the Iron Defense body press and stuff, and clearly the people that are making the finals of these tournaments knew better than us. Clearly
they did. Yeah, so going into game 2, both players have like I don't know, like we kind of saw in the mid game there where they were I guess where Alex was trading damage. There wasn't a lot of damage being traded back yet, but he was choosing what damage to deal. That's kind of where the game tipped.
Yeah.
In that if like different moves had been clicked, then the game could have ended differently. So the early game is not something that probably either player is looking to mess with too much. I think trading in DD for Trick Room is probably like what both players are okay with, especially if it's like a nice damage trade onto the Armourouge as well.
Yeah, especially because I think that if you're Alex here, that you were favored in that game. Like I would say after that first turn, you were in the better position. I think that.
I thought the game was over.
Yeah. So like, I think most of the time Alex wins that game, and it just happened to not go his way that time. So I don't mind if I'm Alex, just going for the same thing and making sure I get a little bit more damage down on every turn. And if you're Francesco, like maybe you recognize that that game went your way on some slightly like lower than probable situations, but even then, like it worked, so that you may as well keep trying it. Like a lot of times, you can like preemptively adjust your game plans going into a game 2 or 3, but there's something to be said about if it's not broke, don't fix it, right?
Yeah, for sure. So into game 2 here. Yep. So we are kind of expecting to see the same thing.
Pretty much, yeah. I think the Terra there is probably what picks up the KO. NDD is always trained to be bulky, and just a choice band Outrage. I don't know that it would be enough, just because Dragapult's attack is not super
I feel like
high.
it must be.
I mean, like obviously, there's no question in my mind that the Terra
the
is, but I think it might be close if it's not like terastallized. And we see the same thing play out here. There's no insidious like damage rolls with the power gem that Francesco missed last time. It's about the same damage on Armor Rouge.
Well, it was like 23 the first time, so I think that never knocks out even if it is a damage roll, right? Yeah.
We do see the King Gambit though. That's a big adjustment on Alex's side.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's not something I would have expected. I think probably you stick with Torkoal, or I stick with Torkoal if I was playing this team. But yeah, King Gambit, obviously a very strong Pokemon, is gonna like just be a different source of damage, I guess. And then have the opportunity to like boost, I guess, is the big thing.
Yeah.
And here, like he's basically in a position where it's like not particularly threatened. I think Glamora uses Earth Power, but King Gambit doesn't really care about that all that much.
Yeah.
So you basically just get to like go for a free Swords Dance.
That's exactly what happens. The Earth Power here does a decent chunk, but I think at any point King Gambit doesn't need to be like incredibly healthy. There's nothing on the field on Alexis's or Francesco's side that can threaten it until Trick Room is over. Like Argonackle can Salt Cure it, but it'll take a few turns for the knockout there, and so you can be pretty confident that Expanding Force is going to knock out the Dragapult every time, just because that's a whole lot of damage, and it takes some pretty bulky things to survive that. So knowing that, that's a really big Swords Dance, because now, especially given that Wide Guard was kind of the issue in Alex's head at least, now you have a +2 Black Glasses King Gambit that cannot get blocked by Wide Guard. It will just knock out the Garganacl immediately, and there's not a whole lot Francesco can do to stop it at this point.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of interesting here that whether or not tearing Dragapult is necessary becomes a relevant part of the conversation, because being able to Terra Grass your Garganacl here definitely like flips the matchup against King Gambit.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, like I don't know the calcs, but it's definitely something that, you know, if you don't need to Terra Dragon, that could change the course of this game potentially.
Yeah, for sure. It's just like, especially giving up your Terrestrialized Pokemon on turn 2, like. It's a necessary terrestrialization on turn 1 to get that knockout and to like at least take a Pokemon advantage going into Trick Room, but you do lose a lot of flexibility in the late game here, especially because you really can't switch in anything on that Expanding Force. Like you have to let Dragapult get knocked out there.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's basically the only course. There's nothing that switches into that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just like the expenditure of an awful lot of resources, like very early in the game, simply to, well, I say simply, it's kind of necessary, but to knock out Indeedee,
Yeah.
that you would prefer to have a game plan in which that is not something that you need to do, I guess is the point that I'm making.
The rough thing about Francesco's like matchup here is that there's really no like considerable spread damage on his team. Nothing is running any sort of spread move. Like nothing. Gastrodon sometimes runs Muddy Water. He's not, just from seeing the team sheets when putting this together, but you have to hit the Indeedee a couple times or with one huge attack before you can start to damage anything else.
Right.
And so Alex, I think, is using that to his advantage really well here.
Definitely. Yeah, and eventually this is just going to be Dragonite getting knocked out and the game being taken ultimately like pretty convincingly, where we see kind of what happens when Trick Room goes up and you don't have like the correct game plan to try and stop it from running you over.
Yeah. So
all right.
Same leads again. I think this is fine. Either player can do a lot with these leads. But one thing we're going to see here is that we get the turn 1 Terra, but it is the Glamora this time. So we're about to find out if the Outrage is enough.
I just did the damage calc, and it depends on bulk, but assuming that it's boosting nature Indeedee, it is not enough.
It is not.
As we find out here. Interesting. And then an Earth Power, which, was probably to try and get a little bit of extra damage over that Power Gem onto the Armor Rouge, but instead it doesn't matter. Trick Room goes up, and this time Armor Rouge has not taken any damage.
Yeah, and I think that's a very valid play, especially knowing that it could be a damage roll in the Outrage, but clearly the Terra Dragon Outrage isn't the winning game plan. The Stab Earth Power will do more damage than the Power Gem, just because it's 20% more higher base power or something on Earth Power.
Yeah.
And that certainly would have made up the difference in the damage on Armor Rouge. So should that Outrage have knocked out, I think that's another situation where the game just ends immediately. Unfortunately for Francesco, he came up just short. And it's, not any worse or better than I think the previous game would have been, just because now you have your Dragapult about to get knocked out and your Terra being used on something else. The difference in Terra there isn't a big deal. That actually survived, huh?
I did not expect it to. It's what?
Yeah.
It's Twisted Spoon Armor Rouge. That's a lot of damage. King Gambit's obviously going to take that well. But yeah, I agree with you. I think the play is fine, especially because, we're talking in games 1 and 2 about we don't know exactly what the damage calc is. And I'm sure Francesco was probably wondering as well, is that he knows that, the Terra is going to be enough to knock it out. But, what if we don't need to? And then you just kind of win the game, just like Jake said. I actually played a game at San Diego where I was in exactly the same position, where I was basically okay, I have no way to definitely stop Induty Armor Rouge with this combination of damage that I've been using, so let me try this different source of damage and see if that does it. And it wasn't quite enough.
Yeah, I think at this point it's a matter of not hitting into Wide Guard again.
Yep.
At this point, the Iron Head, is going to do a bunch of damage to Garganacl. You don't have as much space to Swords Dance this game, rather. But I like that Psychic there just because it guarantees that knockout. The Dragapult can't switch out because it's still locked into that Outrage. And instead of going for Swords Dance, the King Gambit just goes straight for an Iron Head for the damage. I respect that, especially because a +2 Kowtow Cleave is not going to do much to a multi-scale Dragonite anyway. And so you give yourself the chance for Garganacl to not move that turn, which is nice, as we did see with the flinch. But even if it did, the Armor Rouge clearly not going to get knocked out by one Salt Cure plus the residuals, and neither will King Gambit. So that's a pretty safe play all around for Alex.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned kind of just trying not to hit into Wide Guard, but I think there are enough situations at this point in the game where Alex can just formulate a game plan where you just don't even need to play that game.
Right.
And he's doing that here, right? Clicking only the single target moves, so you don't have to play the mind games if you have a game plan available that you can just utilize single target damage, and that is exactly what he's doing.
Yeah, the difference between this game and the first game, I think, is that you can very easily just use your single target moves, and there's not enough time for Francesco to make up that damage. Even if let's say Garganacl Salt Cured something that turn instead of a useless Wide Guard, and what? There's nothing that's going to get knocked out in time. The Dragonite doesn't have Protect, just from knowing the movesets there. And so there is no chance that damage could have been... there was no way that single target moves only would have been a difference in damage that would have lost the game for Alex,
right.
Game 1.
Yeah, trying to go for Expanding Force there is just kind of walking into a potential win condition for Francesco.
Mm-hmm.
Ultimately, I think being that far ahead, especially with Hatterene still in the back, it probably doesn't matter either way. Is that there's still going to be enough damage regardless of whether or not Trick Room is up to take enough knockouts there. But yeah, just not having to play those mind games at all is obviously the best scenario. And I think those kinds of games are a little interesting, as we're kind of obviously one of the things about this project that is interesting as we get to look at these matches in a little bit of hindsight, and we're not live trying to cast it. Well, sometimes I am. I did. We look at it in a little bit of hindsight now, where we can kind of say that, okay, yeah, Francesco managed to steal game 1, which is probably an accomplishment in itself, and then you look at the King Gambit adjustment in game 2 and think to yourself that there was probably not really a way that he could beat that combination.
Yeah, especially the Terra Dark King Gambit. Even if the Gastrodon comes, for example, it's not going to do too much with Earth Power. That bringing the King Gambit there has very few downsides, especially given that the Torkoal is annoyed pretty strongly by the Garganacl, but King Gambit doesn't care at all. And so I think that's a really smart adjustment. Even if he had won that first game, I think that's very much something that could have happened game 2 anyway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. So an interesting set. I think those kinds of hard trick room teams are very interesting, and I think one of the things I find interesting about them is that kind of like we saw in game 2 and game 3 that often they win or lose at team preview. And I think that was pretty clearly like what was happening in game 2 and game 3, is that once Alex figured out like what the optimal combination and win condition was, that there wasn't really a lot that could be done.
Yeah. I do like Alex's take on it though, because there were 3 trick room setters, which I think gives him a lot more flexibility. Even a lot of times, even if you have 2, like sometimes there's not one that's like much greater than the other in terms of like being able to set up trick room in a game. But giving yourself those 3 options means that, given team preview, like, you know, sometimes you just can't bring Hatterene for whatever reason. Like, you still have the 2 options for trick room, and the nice thing about 2 of them, the Hatterene and the Armourouge, is that they're also like primary damage dealers, and so you don't have to waste turns getting something off the field to make use of the trick room.
Yeah, and I think all of them is that like you said, Jake, you want to find like enough to differentiate between the 3 trick room setters so that they're offering you different things in different situations in which you can set trick room. So obviously, like Armourouge has unique typing so that you can utilize the fire type to potentially like force situations where you can get trick room up, and flash fire as well as that option. Hatterene has magic bounce so that you can block taunt and spore and things like that if that's the condition for stopping trick room. So those are the kinds of like things in team building that are really important for hard trick room, that you don't necessarily talk about when the battles are going on, but it's like relevant as far as like creation of game plans to get trick room up, since it's necessary when you're playing this kind of team.
Yeah.
Yep. We talk a lot about the trick room team too. Francesco's team was like pretty cool. Fire spin Dragonator. I didn't even know I got that move.
I didn't either. I think it's really cool though. Like, essentially you just try to trap things on the field and make them get knocked out over the course of the next 4 or 5 turns. Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially because you have that too. Yeah. And the 2 things that have like the residual moves, the Salt Cure and the Fire Spin, both have recovery. With Roost and Recover. So I think it's
kind of scary.
Really cool. Yeah.
It's kind of scary. Yeah, so with that, we bid adieu to Series 1. We will be back in a couple weeks with Series 2. I think we've got Orlando is what, next? Not this weekend, but next weekend.
Yes.
And then OCIC is when? Is this weekend?
No, it's 2 weeks after Orlando.
Oh, God, I'm way off.
It's like the 15th of February.
So we'll be back after Orlando then. We'll have an Orlando video probably ready to go. Jake will be playing at that. Well, I don't know. I think you are, right?
Yeah. Unless plans change in the next 9 days.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll be getting into the Paradox Pokemon, which is the change to Series 2.
Yeah.
Metagame is already kind of under development. It's a lot informed by Series 1, so I think it's going to be like kind of interesting to see what ends up bubbling up at Orlando. And again, it's like a brand new format, so we could see anything.
Yeah, it'll be fun. Plus, I'm from Orlando, so I get to go home. Yay.
Imagine being from Florida. Cannot be me. But anyway, thanks for coming by to this episode of Future Sight. We have a lot of fun doing it. As always, hit us up on socials if you have any comments, concerns, obviously compliments, monetary gifts. You can find us on Twitter, and I think YouTube is where this goes up. So, of course, feel free to... Yeah, we should. I mean, it's going to be what? Maybe enough to help subsidize buying eggs in California.
There we go.
Yeah, so we appreciate the feedback. And as always, thanks for your support. We really do appreciate it, the folks that view it. We would do it anyway, but it's nice to know that some people are listening to us talk.
Yeah.
So until then, we will be back in 2 weeks with some Series 2 action. Thanks so much for watching.